Yo, yo. Welcome in. We are less than 48 hours away from the NBA trade deadline. Perfect timing here on Philly Take with RB because literally not even an hour ago, we finally get some trade rumors. We have hope. We have life. Yes, something may actually happen. The Sixers have interest. Thank you. I feel like Sixer fans have needed just a jolt of something over the last 5 days. We finally got something to hang our hats on a little bit. Welcome into the show, RB, and of course, my guy Sean Barnard tapping in with us again. Sean, what is going on, man? How are you feeling?
Yeah, it feels good that we have some substance to talk about. This isn't just throwing stuff at the walls. There's actual reports actually linking the Sixers to names that could help this team. So feeling a lot better than I did really even this morning, and especially this coming on the heels of the Joel Embiid news. Having at least somewhat of an idea, even though the organization continues to be obnoxiously vague with all these reports, at least we have some sort of idea what specifically he's dealing with, what the timeline looks like, and that the door is not closed on him returning this season. So vibes are a little bit higher in the Sixers world after the end of the day than it was when I woke up.
Dude, you're not lying. You're not lying because a couple days ago, the last few days, I'm sitting here going, well, this Sixers team looks not anything formidable without
Yep.
Joel Embiid. Like they can't even they go out there last night, they're controlling the first half, and then they get blown away. And I'm like, oh man, like we need something. But then we get these Joel Embiid updates, and it's like, is it even worth it? Is it even worth it? And I'm starting to think the thoughts are creeping in my head, like, man, they may not do anything. But we finally have some life. So hopefully we can get something here in the next 48 hours or not even now. But we will get into it all. We're going to talk about the Joel Embiid major updates from today. We're going to talk about two players that the Sixers have interest in, and we're going to look at some potential mock trades, some more targets. But once again, if you guys are in here, man, drop a like on this stream. Help us push it around. Subscribe here on Philly Take with RB. Subscribe to Sean on every platform. He constantly pumps out content. One of the hardest workers I know, and he's going to be covering all this stuff just like me. So shout out to him and everybody in the chat, man. Let's get it rocking. How did you feel? Because I know we talked last week on the roundtable when it comes to Joel Embiid, and then we get okay, we're going to know by the end of the weekend.
Yeah.
And then we get, okay, we're going to know on Tuesday when he goes into surgery. And then today we get an update, and now we have the Shams and Woj battle again. And we'll talk about what they said, but how do you just feel overall about this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I still have a great deal of frustration with the overall management of things and just the lack of transparency. I think it's a bad look on everyone from Joel to Daryl Morey to the Sixers franchise as a whole. That to me, I just think everyone will be painted in a more positive light if you're just open and honest. Like, even if the conversations coming back, and appreciate the love there, even if the conversations coming back are just, we know that Joel Embiid has a knee issue, that we're figuring out the extent, what the timeline is, and you just are open and honest about that. Like everyone, that's completely reasonable. But the fact that it is always like this, maybe that, and then with this specifically, we still don't have like an exact timeline. We still don't know exactly what surgery he got, whether it was the meniscectomy, whether it was the potential meniscus repair. I assume if it was the full meniscus repair, that it would be ruled out by now. So I am like a little bit frustrated that there isn't just like the full story put in front of us. But the good news is at least that the door seems to be remaining open for Embiid making a return to the floor. It does seem like it's pretty best case scenario as far as the actual return to process. We'll see what actually happens when he starts taking these strides towards getting back on the basketball court. But it certainly could be worse based on the news that did come out.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel because in some way the Sixers medical staff, the organization, they always do this. Like they always conceal it. And then they say, oh, well, we'll see how it goes. We'll reevaluate. So I really don't know what to think. I
Yeah.
just feel bad from the human standpoint. Like everything this guy does to elevate his game on a yearly basis, like this season he was having, it was hard to put into words. And here he is yet again. We're not even at the All-Star break, and they ran him into the ground. And you already know how I feel. We talked about it last week, but should have never played that game, should have came out of that game. And unfortunately, we're looking at a circumstance where he may not even come back. I hope he does. But even if he comes back, you have to hope he can play and he's in rhythm and he's conditioned and all those type of things. And we know that time is limited with Joel Embiid. So I just feel bad for him. And I
Yeah.
hope he's doing all right mentally.
Yeah, it was cool to see Nick Nurse kind of acknowledge that pregame yesterday against the Mavericks, that he did kind of dive into that and have that quote saying how he has been a little up and down from a mental standpoint, that this is really tough on him. He's a competitor. He wants to be out there and all these things. And then to me, from the Sixers perspective, this only reinforces why you push all the chips in the middle of this year, because as much as it's not a guarantee that he comes back or looks like himself when he comes back, but do you feel better about that conversation next year? That we do know the track record of Joel Embiid. And I love Joel Embiid. Very grateful for what he's done for this franchise, being the centerpiece, and really just raising the floor of this team in a way that few players around the entire NBA could do. I mean, it is night and day when you look at this team without him. Just what a just lottery bound bottom tier team they are without Joel Embiid. And I get there was obviously no D'Anthony Melton, no Nico Batum. There's other guys missing as well. But Joel Embiid is the anchor of this team on both sides of the floor. So when you have your anchor, your franchise superstar, that does have the potential to come back towards the end of the seasons and make a playoff push, you better have a championship contending team ready to join him. Because if the expectations are that he returns and he's going to have to step right back into averaging 35 points per game and having the highest usage rate in the NBA, I just don't think that's quite the recipe for success. So for me, the fact that there is this level of optimism that he can return, it's only more reason why these Sixers have to act now at the trade deadline.
No, I agree 100%. If there's any opportunity that he comes back and can be healthy, you have to get him some ammunition, because
Yep.
he is literally, by definition, the most valuable player. Like, it is night and day compared to any other player. You see how this team looks without him right now, and it's just really bad. But Woj tweeted out today, and we'll go over to Twitter because we got a lot to share here. Welcome on into the show, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys being here. But let's go ahead and go over to Woj. We got the Woj Shams battle, as always. Woj tweeted this out today. Joel Embiid underwent a left meniscus procedure. They're very odd with the wording in this whole thing. And shout out to the doctor. I forget his name, Brian Sutter, I think. Brian
Yes. Yeah.
Sutter, who makes the YouTube videos. He's been going at Woj and Shams, but he has not enjoyed this wording at all. So Woj says he underwent a left meniscus procedure and will be reevaluated in 4 weeks. And then we have Shams, who was on the Takeoff podcast with John Clark, and he says that it's going to be anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks in terms of the entire injury. So that, I feel like that's hope and best case scenario, but I still feel like they don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe they do know and they're not telling us in terms of leverage purposes. But I think everything comes down to Thursday. If the Sixers go out and they make a move or they make multiple moves, then you know they believe there's a shot he comes back. If they go silent and they make zero moves, he's done for the year. That's how I feel about it. But I don't know. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I feel like I've learned all this medical knowledge over the years with the Sixers. I don't know if they repaired the meniscus, if they took it out. I don't know what they did. All I know is that he underwent surgery and they said he'll be reevaluated after telling us they would know what the timetable is.
Yeah, and I totally agree that their actions over these next 2 days will speak way more about their feelings on whether this team has a chance of competing this year and thus whether Joel can come back than anything that they can publicly say. Now, it is still frustrating, this lack of wording. I will say that never thought my 3 years of not finishing physical therapy school would pay off as much as they have in this past week. But hey, it is paying off a little bit. So it has been cool to kind of dig into a little bit of the medical side of things. But yeah, very frustrating how there is not the complete picture painted by the Sixers. And just once again, I feel like it would make everyone look better if you just lay it out. My honest reading the tea leaves is that every expectation is that Joel will be returning, but they don't want to put that full pressure on him in case something goes wrong in the return to play process. And I do understand that from a logic standpoint, but also like there's nothing wrong with saying that either in my mind. And we understand the injury history. This is the same meniscus that was torn in 2016, 2017 that he had surgery on in his rookie season there. He's had injuries to the other knee as well throughout his career. So he's a big man. He's had his injury issues. It's not the ideal situation by any means, but I do think that there is reasonable optimism for him to come back this year.
Yeah, and I mean, he usually does find a way somehow to come back in and play. So, I mean, hopefully he can muscle through. Again, I'm worried about his personal health. Like, I want him to be all right. I mean, there's implications of this even beyond his career that we have to take into consideration. And even despite all he's been through in this organization, you really have to keep him in mind. But I was feeling down. I was like, damn it, Joel's done. His team's cooked. We have nothing, and we have another 30 games to go. But then I saw this clip, and it changed everything. It changed everything. Adrian Wojnarowski on ESPN. Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes, open your ears, take a listen to what Woj had to say on NBA Today.
I think we got no audio, RB.
I'd say no audio. All right, let's see if we can fix it. See if we can fix it. I don't use StreamYard anymore. They're probably like, what the heck are we listening to? But see if I can let's see. We're gonna fix it. No worries. We're gonna fix it. By the way, shout out to Dr. Restitution with the $5 super chat. He says, what if Morey is trying to do Tobias for Bogdanovic, but is also considering moving all of our picks for Cade Cunningham? Does Detroit do that and build around Jalen Duren? I do not see that being a possibility because I think Detroit's weird. And I mean, they just had a weird approach to this deadline, but I don't think Daryl Morey wants to move Tobias Harris. Matter of fact. So, Sean, I'll let you take that while I try to figure this audio thing out.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying if there's any chance of Cade Cunningham wearing a Sixers uniform, I would be in favor of it. That I do like Cade quite a bit. I think he's getting in a tough situation out there in Detroit. I don't really know what the route that Detroit wants to take is. That even bringing in Tobias, who they have rumored interested and have throughout most of the season, that's a guy that like just kind of guarantees you a middle of the park kind of situation. So I don't really understand it. I do agree with you, though, RB, that I think that the Sixers are dead set on keeping Tobias, and Daryl Morey specifically does think that, like, I think he's very much attracted to the $40 million just cleanly coming off the books this offseason. I think that has a lot to do with it and the continuity of keeping him around. So frustrating, but yeah, I don't see Tobias going anywhere. I'm still in on Bogdanovic, even if Tobias is still on this team, though.
And also to that point, I just don't see it being a Daryl Morey type of move. Like, I think the Sixers, and we'll talk about this a little later on, I think they could potentially acquire some contracts that could be beneficial in the next several years, given how they feel about Joel Embiid. But I just don't see him going for a Cade Cunningham. I think he's going for the big names, the stars right now, if that's the route they decide to go, or they're going for strictly role players. So I think it'd be a tough deal. And he says, I don't think Detroit would or should trade Cade, but I'm trying to make sense of the report. Moore is going after unavailable stars. So, yeah, I don't know.
That Mikal Bridges was my take of the unavailable stars was my gut there, but that sounds like they're turning down. There was a report they turned down 5 first-round picks for Bridges. I find that hard to believe. I would have to think those are probably the fake first-round picks with heavily protection or something like that, but that's what my guess was from that report.
If the Nets turn down that many first-round picks, I mean, come on now. Come on. That's absolutely ridiculous, but I don't believe it. I feel like we hear a lot during this trade season, and you got to just kind of pick apart what makes sense. But I think we got the audio, so let's run it back. Let me know, chat, if you guys can hear this.
We know that Embiid is going to be out, Woj, for the All-Star game. What are the Sixers weighing as we're 48 hours away, essentially, from the trade deadline?
Malika, the Sixers are very much weighing the possibility that Joel Embiid does return this season, that they can still play with him as their centerpiece. And because of that, they're going to continue to be buyers at this trade deadline. And I think they're trying to improve themselves on multiple fronts. Perhaps is there a backup center who can help carry them?
I want to pause there. Let's go, man. Sixers buyers. Didn't think I'd hear those words in the same sentence. Didn't think I'd hear it, but it is beautiful to hear, man. And listen up to what he says right here. I feel like people are misinterpreting what he's saying here. But
here in the short term, there's certainly a number of them available. There are a lot of teams in the market for backup centers, potentially players like Andre Drummond, who had been in Philadelphia before, Kelly Olynyk. Those are some of the guys in that marketplace, but doing bigger things than that. What Philly wants to do, they're in 5th place right now in the East. They're 3 games up on Indiana. What Philly would like to be able to do is stay at least in 6th place, not drop out into the play-in, and see if they can maintain that until Joel Embiid gets back or once he gets back. And I think for them, that's certainly a short-term goal. But they're out. They're aggressive. They know they have a tight window with Joel Embiid. They know there's risk in doing a deal or deals here, and then he doesn't come back this season, or he's not himself. But I think they're willing to live with that risk because they have certainly, the reigning MVP, a player who was on his way to another MVP this season. And if they can have him healthy in the playoffs or healthy enough, they want to have a group around him that gives them a chance.
So he said they're out and they're aggressive. Now, I saw a lot of people running with these quotes and saying, the Sixers are interested in Andre Drummond based off this clip. I don't think he was saying that the Sixers are interested in Andre Drummond and Kelly Olynyk. I think he was saying there's a market for them. Like there are teams interested in them and the Sixers should be interested. But I don't think he really meant like they've inquired about both of them. I wish they would. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think they'd be perfect targets. But what do you make of that whole spiel from Woj? Do you buy any of it?
I mean, I agree with the mindset of it, and it's good to actually hear it because it's been pretty much white noise and just completely quiet on the Sixers end of things for most of this year. So they should be buyers. All the things that Woj said about, we know this is a limited window with Joel Embiid, and while it is a risk that maybe he does not look like himself once he does return from this meniscus injury, he's turning 30. He's going to be 30 by the time he comes back from this injury. Who knows how many more years you have, that when you have a player, the talent and the level of him, you owe it 100% to Joel to go all out every single year. And that especially is the case when he is in the press, the historic level that he has for most of the season. So I loved hearing that from Woj. I do mostly agree with you, but I do think that both Kelly and Andre Drummond are pretty clear connections there. We can weigh the pros and cons of both and get into those. But Drummond obviously has a familiar place in Philadelphia, well-liked from his time here, and a guy that would be an upgrade over Paul Reed at this point in time, and Mo Bamba based on what we've seen on the court. And Kelly Olynyk is kind of a guy that's been one of those forever almost Sixers. He's a real deal, legit shooter, 37% from his career, shooting 42.9% from three this year. He would be that ideal stretch four that you can play next to Joel Embiid when he does come back. So that's very appealing to me. So it was good to see Woj kind of lay things out from this perspective.
Absolutely. And shout out to Prince Monito, my guy, $2 super chat. He says, I don't care what happens, but our dog Pat is untouchable. Bev untouchable. I freaking love it, man. Bev's impact is crazy on a nightly basis. Like he just does all the little things. He constantly glues his team together. So shout out to Pat Bev. I don't think he'll get moved. But speaking of getting moved, I was moved because at first I didn't buy the Woj clip, Sean. I said, man, they're just, this guy's a puppy. They're just planting them out there, damn it. But then we get the weekly trade bomb of an article from our guy, Jake Fisher. Jake Fisher drops a bomb, and we're going to go read what he had to say in this article because I am excited, ladies and gentlemen. Drum roll, please. Let's go ahead and read this. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let me see if I can zoom it in a little bit so we can all read together because we got some news, ladies and gentlemen. We got some news. All right. Here's an article from Jake Fisher, and here's the section on the 76ers. He says Sixers are hoping to move a future swap to acquire more imminent first-round picks. The Sixers' soonest pick they can trade won't come until 2026. So while Philly's 3 picks it yielded in return for Harden would suggest the Sixers have plenty of ammunition to acquire a meaningful player, Philly seems to be prioritizing ways to buy while maintaining future flexibility. That goes right along with what we've heard all season from Daryl Morey. But then we start naming names. Yeah, let's go. What do we think about these guys, man? Philly is exploring conversations with a variety of teams, but one known target for the Sixers is Pacers guard Buddy Hield. Hield's $18.5 million salary would be a match for several of the Sixers' expiring contracts, and his expiring deal would not add future financial burden onto Philly's clean cap sheet for the offseason, as the Sixers have left rival teams with the impression they are wary of taking back long-term salary. Keep in mind, right now, the Sixers only have 4 contracts on their book after the season. Matter of fact, 3 contracts and a cap hold for Tyrese Maxey, and he'll probably get an extension. But then it says here, another target is Pistons guard Bojan Bogdanovic, who is on the books for $20 million this year, but only has $2 million guaranteed for next year. Detroit has long shown an interest in a reunion with Tobias Harris, league sources told Yahoo, but in any deal where the Sixers bring back Bogdanovic, it would seem Philly does not want to part with Tobias Harris. Sean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that I do think the top of my list for team needs is really a high volume 3-point shooter. That this team currently is 26th in the NBA in 3-point attempts per game. That's just not good enough. And there's obviously some inherent issues when you're built around Joel Embiid, who is a mid-range heavy and post heavy style of player. But you have to balance that with guys that are willing to let it fly. Buddy Hield is a guy that I've wanted to see on the Sixers for quite some time. And we see the way shooters are maximized on the Sixers team when Embiid is on the floor. Think about Seth Curry, think about JJ Redick, even Georges Niang, even Marco Bellinelli, if you want to go back that far. Shooters have a field day playing off Embiid's gravity, and they need guys to willing to put up those attempts. And I think it's undersold just how great of a shooter Buddy Hield is through his career. 40.1% three-point shooter on 7.7 attempts per game. Last year, he shot 42.5% on 8.5 three-point attempts per game. That is real deal, high volume, high efficiency, and just something that would add to this team immediately. He'd be a guy ready to let it fly. He's got that Terquavion Smith ready energy of ready to let it off his hands every single second, and a far more proven guy that has gotten better year in and year out. He can dribble a little bit, pass a little bit. He's a better basketball player than he gets credit for beyond just the shooting. And Bojan, I like quite a bit as well. I like the size on him. He's 34 years old and a little bit past his prime, but he's still a 20-point per game scorer this season. Still another guy that would immediately be the best shooter on this team. So both these names make a lot of sense to me, and I wouldn't even mind getting both of them if it's possible.
I'm right there with you, man. I'm right there with you. This is the first time we've heard the Sixers linked to somebody. Like, finally, we hear Sixers have interest in X player or Y player. And just to add on to what you said, I think Bojan would just be another creator that could finally take some pressure off of Tyrese Maxey, and especially with Joel Embiid out for a while. Bojan's a guy you can plug in the starting lineup. You can plug him in off the bench. Doesn't matter. Buddy Hield, we know his limitations as a defender. We know, some of the ups and downs he's had. He's been in millions of trade rumors over the years. But at the end of the day, Sixers need shooting. They need guys you can stick out there in a corner or coming off a movement on a screen and say, go knock down a shot. Because right now, Kelly's been, pretty cold since he came back from the injury. It seems like Batum is out every third game. It seems like Melton's never playing again, and they don't have any trust in Rocco. So I like this. I really like the fact that they're interested in guys that make sense structure-wise around Tyrese Maxey and in consideration of Joel Embiid as well. Now, I find it funny that, they say the Pistons want Tobias Harris because we've heard that multiple times. I don't understand why they want him back other than to clear cap space and say goodbye. But they've had a fascination with Bogdanovic. Keep in mind, last year, the Pistons would not trade Bogdanovic for 2 first-round picks. So is that what it's going to take to get Bogdanovic? At that point, I don't know if it's worth it. But if you could snag this guy for maybe, I don't know, a first or, a first in a couple years, maybe a second and a couple players, I think then you're talking.
Yeah, I totally agree. And frankly, I think that's realistic from a Pistons standpoint too, that what they should be looking for at this point in time is draft capital, that you should be stocking the closet with assets, that you're kind of in this no man's land. They've obviously had some horrific results, that historic losing streak, that they don't really have an identity or plan for the way that they're building. So the way that to continue down that path is free yourself up with flexibility, add draft picks to either repackage or add another impact player. I'm not sure what their long-term plan is. I don't know if Tobias Harris is the answer, although it would certainly bring no pain in my heart to watch him suit up in a Pistons jersey. But I do think Bogdanovic is essentially sitting in no man's land out there. And just to list off his stats, once again, 20.2 points per game on the season, 3.4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, shooting 41.5% from three on a career high 7.4 three-point attempts. For his career, he's a 39.5% three-point shooter. That's real deal numbers. And that is a guy that I know this was several years ago at this point, but there was a point in time when he was on those Jazz teams where he was asked to be the number one defenders, only Kevin Durant's of the world and all the number one options of the world. I don't think he has those type of legs, but he's at least another option that you can bring to the table for these Sixers. And I do believe that there is a competitive spirit that he still has in it. Like, I don't think this is a guy that's content just staying out there in Detroit, just finishing off his NBA career. I've seen a couple moments this year where I've seen some hunger in him and him still having that desire to compete, can play. And I think that it would benefit him to go join a contender. So to me, this works for both sides. And you have to think that price has gone down from the fact that he more or less is expected to be a free agent. I know it is the $2 million cap hit next year. So could potentially be extended if things go well with the Sixers. But for me, it makes sense for both sides.
And I think that's a good point. I want to shout out to Harrison G, my guy, with a $5 super chat. Appreciate you, man. He says, seems like they're targeting scores over two-way guys like Dorian Finney-Smith. Interesting. Keep up the work to both of you. Harrison, appreciate you. Does great work as well. Yeah, to that point and to your point, I think you make an interesting statement there. The extension, right? Like, there's still a lot of uncertainty as it relates to Joel Embiid. So let's just say down the road, he comes back mid-April, but he's not himself, right? And the Sixers can't really go out there, be to their full capacity, have that identity, and they get bounced. Well, how about if you have a next season filled with Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Bojan Bogdanovic, right? So you could get this guy extended at a reasonable cost, and then you're able to still go out and kind of work some things when it comes to the offseason. Because right now the Sixers are projected to have $55 million in cap space. Obviously, a chunk of that would get taken up, but you may be able to go out and get another two-way player or another shooter to pair with these guys. So if you can take that into consideration and say, convince Bojan to stay here, I think it makes even more sense at that point. And I think it's smart. I know he's going to be 35, but he's still, like you said, you just read off the numbers. He still has shown that he can play. And that's with a bottom of the barrel Pistons team that I would not even get up in the morning for. I mean, they're not motivating at all. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the DFS comment, the Dorian Finney-Smith here, I think is interesting. That's a guy that, and I kind of throw Alex Caruso in the same category here of a player that I would absolutely love to have on the Sixers, but that I think the price tag is just too strong for a player of their caliber. That seeing reports of Dorian Smith, either the Nets turning down or them receiving offers of 2+ first-round picks, that's a lot for a guy that is a streaky shooter. He is a good defender, and once again, a guy that I would like, but you do have to weigh this risk reward of how much is it actually worth or how much are you overpaying for this point in time? Because while I totally am still all in on the Sixers have to find a way to get things right, you're not doing yourself any favors by overpaying for a guy that doesn't end up being a difference maker. So I definitely put Dorian Finney-Smith kind of in that category, as unfortunate it is, because once again, I do like him as a player, but I think the price tag is going to be too much there.
And it's pretty astonishing in terms of the rumors with what they are asking for. I mean, it's pretty crazy if you ask me. Like, they don't want a late first-round pick. They didn't want 2 firsts before. Like, come on, man. It's Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yeah.
That's why the Nets will always be the Nets. Shout out to my guy Glitch, great channel member, gifting a Philly Take membership. Drop some MVPs in the chat for Glitch. I want to talk about the Sixers side of this now, because we just talked about why Bogdanovic would make sense. We talked about why Buddy Hield would make sense, but how would it get done for the 76ers? So let me go ahead and pull up my screen here, and we're going to look at the 76ers essentially cap table right now and where they're sitting at for this season, and we'll get a better look at this. But Sixers have some expiring deals, and before these rumors came out, what I was thinking is, okay, if you decide to punt on this season, you have guys that you can move for draft picks. I still think you can move these guys, but now they could potentially be valuable to other teams because they can take on that expiring salary and say, okay, here's whoever, and we'll clear up more space on our books. So like I said a little while ago, Joel Embiid, this is for next year, $51 million. Paul Reed at 7.7. And then you have Jaden Springer with an exercise club option and Tyrese Maxey with a cap hold. But other than that, all these guys are coming off. So who do you think's expendable, Sean? Like Marcus Morris at 17 million, that could be very valuable in a deal, but are the Sixers ready to move off him? What about Robert Covington, 11.7, who Nick Nurse just said there's no light at the end of the tunnel for Robert Covington. Furkan Korkmaz, we know, has been a trade candidate for 5 years now. Who is expendable out of all these expiring salaries? Daniel House, KJ Martin, all these guys on the bench.
Yeah, so obviously what makes the NBA kind of unique in these conversations is because of the rules of the trade that you do have to match the salaries, be within the ballpark of making sure that you can work on this from a CBA standpoint. I do think Marcus Morris is the most likely to get traded because of that $17 million cap hit that he holds. You're not trading for Marcus Morris, the player. What you're trading for is the draft picks that come attached with them in a part of the package. I also, as we see these reports of Daryl Morey trying to trade future first-round picks for more pressing ones, the 2026 being the first that is available for trade, I do think it's incredibly likely that we see like a KJ Martin for a 2nd-round pick or 2 second-round picks or something like that in terms of a deal. I think there's going to be a lot of those. I do think Furkan has a good chance of being freed, maybe a Furkan in house. That number gets to just under 10 million there. So that's the type of player swap. And then that opens up a roster spot, which seems to be destined for Kyle Lowry or even a Danny Green conversation. So I do think that they're going to hope to kind of do a 3-for-1 or 2-for-1 type of deal in a trade to free up some roster spots. And I still would keep Marcus Morris right at the top of the list of most likely to be traded just because of that 17 number. That puts you in the ballpark of a Bogdanovic or of a Buddy Hield or even a DeJounte Murray for that specific cap number there. So for me, Marcus Morris from a financial standpoint makes a ton of sense. And to me, that's a major reason why he's even here from the trade in the first place.
I just got to say something real quick because it just popped in my mind. And obviously I knew this, but Marcus Morris is the 3rd highest paid player on the roster. I mean, like, have we been drunk all season? Like, we knew this team was meshing. They were coming together. They had good chemistry. Marcus Morris is the 3rd highest paid player on the roster. I mean, that's actually insane.
I
That's
mean,
insane.
when we have these cap conversations, it's tough not to look directly above to Tobias Harris at $39.2 million. That is why that is like directly just strangling your franchise from able to move money around, able to give these middle tier deals. So Tobias has kept this whole entire salary cap hostage for several years now. It is nice that this is finally the final season of that.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. Shout out to Gennaro becoming a channel member. Appreciate you very much. Champ, new channel member as well. Appreciate you. Give them some MVPs in the chat. Drop some fires. We got 350 people in here. Drop a like on the show. Give me your thoughts. We're going to get into more trade scenarios because I have a couple mock trades for Sean that I want to know yes or no on. We'll get to those later on. And my guy, Run It Back Philly. We might as well bring him up on here, man. Run it back. Come up on the show, man. He says, everyone you got in the Harden trade can get traded at the drop of a hat. They're all 50 years old and injured or running back like KJ Martin. And speaking to that point, man, 31 years old, 34, 35, 33. Sixers did get old in the blink of an eye, man. I mean, very old. We got a lot of vets on this team, and the injuries are stacking up. And I feel like we kind of expected it, but it's pretty early in the season.
Yeah, and to touch on each one of these guys, for starters, Marcus Morris, he is a guy that can get a bucket, but not a guy that I think plays legitimate playoff minutes or shouldn't on this team. I think he by far is the guy that thinks most likely to be traded, and rightfully so. That is the most movable number and most movable player in my mind. Nico Batum is a guy that is so much more valuable when Joel Embiid is in the lineup versus when he's off it. That we're going to see over this stretch. I think there's going to be a lot of Batum hate going around of this isn't the guy that we got. The bottom line is when Joel is here, I think he's a pretty perfect player. We know how he can make entry passes, the quick release threes, just a smart, heady veteran player. I would like for Batum to stick around for this playoff run, but I'm not going to dig my heels in and say you can't trade him for anyone. If there's an upgrade, there's an upgrade, but I certainly would put Batum as the number one priority to keep. And Covington, it just sucks, man, the knee injury things. I was really excited about Rocco coming back. And frankly, I think if he was on the floor, he is an impact player on this team that I think he can be a 20-plus minute per guy in the playoffs, but that is only if his body allows. And the type of player he is, I do think would be great on this team. But it also felt like even before he got hurt that he wasn't one of Nurse's guys, that it didn't feel like Nick Nurse had a ton of trust in him. He was kind of getting some DNPs and limited minutes anyway. So I don't think Covington is in any way untouchable either, to DJ's point.
Yeah, dude, like it feels like Rocco, and to much surprise, I mean, came in and impacted the game immediately. Yeah. Guy was having, 3-4 steals in like 12 minutes off the bench, and out of nowhere, they just stopped playing him. And then he's hurt. And now DeAnthony Melton's hurt. It's like all the defenders that you had on this team have just gone poof, and you're seeing it on the floors. And speaking of defense, I feel like that's the area, everybody's going to look at the offense of Joel Embiid, but the defense has been severely, severely missed. I feel like teams are just, running through the Sixers, like just blowing us away, going right to the paint every possession, and we have no way to stop it. And we need some interior defense. So we're talking about Bogdanovic and Hield. You need shooters, you need creators. I actually think the number one need at the deadline is a backup big at this point. Because I think if you keep running with this same lineup out there and you got Mo Bamba coming in, who's 7'1" and can't rebound, and Paul, who's undersized at the big man spot, you're not going to stop any team. I'm serious. I don't think they could beat anybody long term.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see kind of what the mindset is. That two of the guys that we brought up or that Woj brought up in that report were Andre Drummond and Kelly Olynyk. Two very different styles of player. We know what Drummond does. We saw him here in Philadelphia. And to me, he's that innings eater type of player that you bring in, that he would absolutely raise the floor of this team for the foreseeable future while Joel Embiid is out. He was the best backup big man that we ever saw or have seen during the Joel Embiid era. And he is a guy that will immediately be the best rebounder on the entire roster, Joel Embiid included in that conversation there. So I see the appeal for Drummond to bring him to this team, but he's also a guy that doesn't move the meter come playoff time. That I think in a likely world, at best, Drummond maybe is winning a couple minutes or is that backup center, but I think it's more likely that there's a chance that Paul can beat him out for that specific role. That I think Paul Reed is at his best when he uses a changeup off the bench rather than being the starting caliber player that like we're kind of seeing right now. I think short doses, a little less is more when it comes to B-ball Paul and the Paul Reed situation, and that's being put on full display here. And then Kelly Olynyk is a guy that I really like. I think he's a real deal shooter, and I'm very much in favor of finding like a true stretch four to play next to Joel. So I see the appeal in like a playoff scenario where Olynyk can make an impact more so than Drummond, but he doesn't have quite the same rim protection or rebounding ability, and he still has some of the same concerns as far as undersized. So two very different players there. I would be interested in both of them and curious what the price tag difference is there. But I do think I'll just say that we remember Andre Drummond for the best moments, and frankly, he was great while he was here. We didn't quite get to the end of the tunnel for Andre Drummond, that it was still a small sample size and that we have seen him in other situations in his career play far worse than he did in Philadelphia. So just to plant that seed out there.
I do agree with that statement, and I think you're right. But in my opinion, when you get desperate, when push comes to shove, when there's no other options, sometimes you got to make do. And I'm just going to go out there and say they need to get Andre Drummond because you're right. Like there is a big liability in Drummond's game, and he hasn't really transitioned to the modern day, and he's not a modern day center and all these things. But who else is out there?
Sure.
If you go past Thursday with B-ball Paul, Mo Bamba, and that's it, you're not asking for success. Woj was talking about in that clip, not falling to the 7 seed. They may fall to the 10 seed without any big men in there. So I believe they have to do what it takes to get Andre Drummond. He's on a very favorable contract, $3.2 million, I think it is this year. I'll pull it up. But I actually have a mock trade for Drummond. I was on Bleacher Report today, and I talked about this. Let me get your thoughts on this.
Okay.
Andre Drummond and Torrey Craig to the 76ers, and going to the Chicago Bulls would be Furkan, Jaden Springer, and 2 second-round picks. And it's funny, the numbers come out exactly to about $4.2 million, which is the amount they need to deduct the tax. The Sixers obviously get the big they need. They get a wing defender who we talked about last week in Torrey Craig. Might not, play a lot of minutes, but the Chicago Bulls get a young defender, and if they're headed towards rebuild, that'd probably be smart for them. A young, kind of piece that they can throw in there and mix around a little bit, and they get 2 second-round picks. If a team wants to go and jump the gun and give a first for Andre Drummond, so be it. I don't think he's worth a first, but 2 seconds, I'd definitely consider that. And you get rid of Furkan's salary, that's expiring salary for the Bulls. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I personally would absolutely do it. I think we're going to get some people that push back and want to hang on to Jaden Springer. And I'll just put my
Let me just jump in. And there was so many people that jumped back for that exact reason.
Yep,
and that is absolutely blasphemous. People don't want to give up Jaden Springer to get a center to float above water the rest of the season. That is crazy. That is crazy. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I'll speak to my thoughts on Springer as a whole, that I do like him. I do believe that he will be a legitimate rotation player for the foreseeable future in the NBA, but I don't think he's a guy that's a needle-moving player on any sort of championship team. And frankly, I think he's still a couple years away from being in that conversation. Now, to compare him to like Matisse Thybulle, who's a guy that had some similar strengths and weaknesses, I think Springer's going to be a far better player than Matisse, that there's not this deer in headlights look to his offensive game that Matisse certainly had, and Springer can put the ball on the floor a little better, get to his own spots. So I do think he ends up like a better player there. But we're talking about winning right now. And the Sixers cannot afford to just like wait for a guy to develop into a rotational player for a guy that can be an impact player right now. So I'm with you. I also think Torrey Craig's better than he gets credit, that he is this type of sort of 3-and-D wing that doesn't quite meet all the requirements, but when you squint, you can look at him that way, and a better option than the Sixers currently have as far as a two-way guy. And Drummond is who he is, that he is going to raise the floor of this team by being this actual rim protecting presence, a guy that does reel in rebounds, which I think is a legitimate issue on the Sixers team as well. So I like the trade. It's kind of a low risk. I don't want to say low risk, high reward, because you know what you're getting, that it's just going to be a guy that codes things up. So to me, this makes sense for sure.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And like I said, $4.2 million, which is the amount they need to deduct the tax. You know, the Sixers ownership wants to deduct the tax. They don't want to pay the luxury tax. They did it last year. They got rid of Thibault. They brought in McDaniels. And from a basketball standpoint, if the Sixers want to patch up a huge hole and they want to stay alive before the potential return of Joel Embiid, they need to go out and get a big. And other than Drummond and Olynyk, who else is out there? Who else is available that you're saying, okay, that's going to really like you can bring that guy in and he can start every night, or he can come in and play 20 minutes. I don't think there's anybody out there. And you spoke to the familiarity of Drummond, and it just makes a lot of sense. And if you have to part with Jaden Springer, who is in year 4 and can't really shoot that well, then so be it. So be it.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. And we also run into the same situation with, obviously you see the flashes of Jaden Springer, but he's still a very theoretical player. That while he shined and he was awesome against Luka, he was awesome against Jordan Clarkson of late, this is still not a guy that, like, when you actually think about it, this Sixers team has to get the best 8 or 9 guys to throw into a playoff rotation for this specific season and moving forward. I don't think Springer cracks that right now. I'm not confident that he cracks it next season, and that you really have to kind of think of it from that perspective, that when you have a guy who still has holes, you got to weigh that balance. So for me, it is win now mode. I think Springer has at least played himself into a guy that has some sort of intrigue around the league. Don't forget, this guy was a first-round pick not too long ago. He's still just 21 years old, that he's younger than some rookies this season. So I get the appeal, and I think you can coat that in a friendly way to other teams, but I haven't seen quite enough to make me lock in and say, I need to keep this guy.
I agree 100%. Now, the question is, do they do it? Do they go out and get a big? I think it's almost automatic, right? Like, they have to get a center. They have to. Let's see if they can get a defender or another creator, but they have to get a big, right? Like, let me ask you, what is your confidence that they make a move by Thursday? How many moves do they make? Did they make 2? Did they make 1? Do they just go quiet and do nothing? Like we said earlier, if they do that, they're kind of just punting everything away. Like, it's done. What do you think they do?
So I'll say that if they don't make a move, it is a colossal failure on Daryl Morey's lap. That if you're having your superstar player, Joel Embiid, essentially rush back to make sure that he's on the floor and go for this playoff push, and you don't have a championship caliber team behind him, that is a huge failure and something that across the board looks awful on Morey. It's a shame for Embiid, and for the Sixers franchise, it's a wasted year of Joel's prime. So you have to do something. I do think that they ultimately make at least 1 move. I think they honestly make at least 2. So I'm confident in that. I still think it's going to be slightly below the margin that we're hoping for. That I think it's much more likely. It's kind of a mock trade like you threw up, like the Andre Drummond, that under the $8 million total in the deal, something like that, rather than the big swing for DeJounte Murray or a player of that caliber, who I certainly would be in favor of. I have pounded the table, and I am a DeJounte Murray guy at this point in time. I haven't loved his game as a whole, but I think you take the best versions of him in San Antonio, take the best version of him in Atlanta, and that player is what the Sixers are missing. So I think they're in a spot where they should be looking to take a big swing. I ultimately don't think Daryl Morey does do that, but I do think that there are like 2 to 3 of these kind of marginal moves where it's adding Drummond, it's adding a shooter, it's adding a ball handler, and while they're not like the name brand options, there's still guys that are going to help this team.
It's crazy because Zach LaVine was out a couple days ago, and they ruled him out for the season. That was one guy Morey was interested in. There's been a couple other names thrown around, but it doesn't seem like the Sixers have had much interest in these bigger names. So to your point, I was going to ask you, like, what do you think about DeJounte Murray or Kyle Kuzma or DeMar DeRozan? Any chance you believe that the Sixers would go and punch for one of these guys and say, all right, we're going to go get another dude? Maybe they trade Tobias, maybe not, and say, all right, we're going to hope and pray Joel comes back, even if we're taking more of a hit now or in future years, to try to make that splash? Or do you think they're just solely going with a role player?
So I'll speak to my motivation for why they should do it has increased greatly after this Joel Embiid news, that even as the Sixers are currently constructed, I don't think they're going to drop far enough where they're out of the playoffs, that there's going to be some sort of postseason situation. Frankly, I think they still stay in the top 6 seeds and stay above the play-in. I do see a potential world where they slip into maybe that 7th or 8th seed, but the bottom line is that there will be some postseason ball. So they have to be prepared for that. And with Joel Embiid looking to return, that we know that that is coming, you kind of are checking 2 boxes here. That number one, you're getting a guy that can help you stay afloat. That if you bring a DeJounte Murray to this team and your backcourt on a nightly basis is DeJounte Murray and Tyrese Maxey, that gives you a whole lot more of a fighting chance than the current group that is being rolled out there on a night-to-night basis, even without Melton, even a Melton and Maxey backcourt. It's a pretty significant upgrade to add DeJounte Murray, who's a guy who can play on both sides of the floor, can get hot, has hit a couple game winners this year, and has a little bit of that self-creation ability, playmaking ability, a good rebounder. And to speak on Murray specifically, and the other part of it being, number one, to help you stay afloat right now, and number two, to have that missing piece when Embiid comes back. Because I do think it's a little unrealistic to think that Embiid just walks right in day one and is ready to pick up where he left off after all that time without basketball. So the only way that works is if you have guys to take things off his shoulders, to help carry some of the offensive load. And that's what bringing in a guy like DeJounte Murray would do, that you now have another option in what you do in the offense. And to speak on Murray's contract, I think that's the biggest downside that Morey's going to push. And I like his contract. That at worst, in 2027, 2028, he's going to be being paid $30 million. That's $10 million less than Tobias Harris is making this year. And we know what DeJounte Murray is. He's 27 years old. That contract is going to age just fine. And worst case scenario, I think you can repackage that and move him on if it does not work out here. So for me, my motivation for taking one of these potential all-star swings has increased now that we know the Embiid situation with him looking to return and him being out for an extended period of time.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think DeJounte Murray, I've started to get sold on it more and more, especially as we see kind of this little inconsistency, I'll call it, just from being young and inexperienced with Tyrese Maxey. Like, he goes for 51. You needed every 51 points, to beat the Utah Jazz. Then we've seen the last couple games, like, it's up and down with Maxey. Like, can he be that number one guy? Can he take over yet? It's a bit questionable. And I think that'll come with time. But, now he's asked to fill very big shoes. So maybe bringing in a guy like DeJounte Murray could help take some of the load off Tyrese Maxey. Maxey could play even more of his natural position as a combo guard at certain points in a game and not feel like the entire burden is on him. So to your point with this contract, I mean, this is a really good contract. And
That's
even another guy I mentioned, Kyle Kuzma, his contract descends over the next couple years. So, like, these players, we have to stop worrying about the figures of, 26 million or 28 million. Think about it overall. Like, the salary cap's only going up. And in a couple years, this might be one of the best contracts in the NBA, especially if he can get back to his form.
Yeah, and look at that percentage there. 18% of the salary cap down to 16.79 in his final year. That is totally fine for a player like DeJounte Murray, who we know what he is. We have a larger sample size to take it. And as far as playing next to Maxey, I think this is a potential pairing that works. That I don't think the Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, his pairing has worked. That as great as Trae Young is, he's a tough guy to play alongside. That he's so ball dominant. He's so specific in the things that he can and can't do. That Murray was very much looked at to be a guy that could pick up his defensive slack, but just he doesn't get the ball in his hands enough to be as impactful as he could be. I think it helps the Sixers out both ways by allowing Maxey to play a little more off ball, having him to be just focused on being a scorer. That gives Murray his opportunity to create as a playmaker. And there was a point in time where Murray averaged over 8 rebounds per game down in San Antonio. That is very appealing to me as well. That is a characteristic I think could help the Sixers team. We know Murray's 6'5", that he has a little better size that can play next to Maxey, can shoot the ball from 3 just fine. So for me, he checks a ton of boxes, and I would be all in for taking that type of big swing. But I don't know if Daryl Morey quite agrees with that.
Yeah, and there might be teams out there as well willing to throw a little bit more than the Sixers, maybe a little more desperation. I want the people in the chat, again, appreciate everybody in here, man. I want everybody in the chat to throw out a name of a person that you think the Sixers should target, or maybe your top trade target, guy you think they may go after. Give us some thoughts. Give us some comments and let us, go off them a little bit. I want to give you one more mock trade because we still haven't talked about this guy. He's been my top trade target the entire year, the last couple months. But I do want to go back to the article for 1 second, because there was one other part I wanted to highlight from Jake Fisher that I thought was very important. And it was this part right here. He says the Bucks, along with the Sixers, are among several teams that have contacted the likes of New Orleans and OKC, attempting to trade future first-round pick swaps or packages of second-round picks to acquire extra first-round selections. Phoenix, you may recall, dealt 2 future first to Memphis for 3 seconds before the season began. Now it seems like several teams are trying to deal those same assets for an even more meaningful return. What do you think about that in terms of their approach? Do you think this could be a deadline where they kind of just, flip some picks around and try to create more of that flexibility that they've been harping on? Or is this more of just, preliminary conversations? We'll reach out and we'll see, we'll kind of test the waters and see what's out there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting that I saw a comment in the chat a little while ago saying how under the new CBA, how second rounds are more important. And I would agree with that. And I would say just draft picks as a whole are more valuable under the new CBA because that is a cost controlled contract, a player or a team controlled kind of deal. So I think that's interesting. I think from the Sixers angle here, that the goal is that they did stockpile the assets with these future Clippers picks, but they're still pretty far in the future. That it's more appealing if you can offer a pick next year versus a pick in 2029. So I think that's the deal that these Sixers are trying to find a way to move up the ladder a little bit and make that more appealing. I don't know how effective that's going to be. I think every team's going to be kind of on the same page, and it seems pretty rare that a team's going to want to say, I'm pretty content with moving from a 2024 pick to a 2029 pick. They're going to want a little something else in that. We see this during draft day a lot where teams will trade like a pick that night for a pick next year for a team trying to get in. It's a little different in the middle of the season. So I'm not overly optimistic that happens just in a specific deal. For me, this would have to be kind of a side effect of a deal as a whole, whether it be in a player deal or a Bogdanovic swap, whatever it may be. So I'm not overly optimistic that happens, but I get the logic behind Maury's perspective.
Makes sense. And shout out to Dan with a $2 super chat. He says, Jesus Christ himself, pray for Joel's well-being. Hey, man, if Joel's not healthy, the main connector's not going, none of this matters. Let's be completely honest. And that's why I even said a couple days ago, like, I feel like the season's over almost if he's not there. I mean, you're not going to win without your best players. And until we get further extensive updates, there's not much I can say. Like, it's frustrating. It really is. But we hope he's okay. And we're going to try to bank on some hope here in the fact that they're interested in a couple different players. So we talked about a bunch of players. I'm seeing a lot of names here in the chat. Appreciate everybody tapping in with us. Jeremy Grant, Corey Kispert, Doug McDermott, DeMar DeRozan, who else? Keldon Johnson, all guys that maybe could come up. I know that from prior years, usually leading up to the deadline, it's a bit quiet. And then Wednesday, I guess Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if we want to look at it from this year, are just hectic. And people are saying it's a quiet deadline, right? Anunoby got moved. Siakam got moved. Terry Rozier got moved. What do you think about deadline day? Do you think it's going to be hectic? Do you think we're going to get that normal splurge of boom, 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 trade, trade, trade? Or could this end up being one of those years where it's like, man, nothing really happened? What do you think?
I think it was trending towards it being a quiet deadline until really today. I felt like the water started to turn a little bit. I still think there needs to be that first domino, and then everybody kind of springs into action. But I think one thing that's worth noting for this specific year is a lot of teams did their work early, including the Sixers with the James Harden trade early on in this year. And then look around the East. The Heat getting Terry Rozier, the Pacers getting Pascal Siakam, even dating back to the offseason with the Damian Lillard trade and Drew Holiday coming to the Celtics. There was a lot of movement like early on in the season and dating back to the offseason that I think has made teams a little gun shy. And I'll also point out that I do think the play-in tournament is having a real effect on fewer teams becoming sellers, that you at least have a ticket into the dance or a chance to get in the playoffs in a way that was not the case for years. So if you're sitting there as a middle tier team, you're not as motivated to just sell off everything in the same way that it was in years past. So I think all those combinations kind of point toward it being a little more quiet, but I still think ultimately one domino will fall and that will lead to a couple other trades. And I expect Daryl Morey to be at the forefront of leading that charge. So I hope that is the case.
As he usually is. Now, I want to look at one more mock trade, and I want you to just give me your thoughts, chat as well, because I think it makes perfect sense. Another one I put on Bleacher Report that I got reamed out for. It's like, man, people don't want to give up anything.
Yeah.
But here is my potential mock trade for Malcolm Brogdon. Let me know what you think about this trade. Marcus Morris Sr. to throw in, the cap that needs to be in there to make it work. Jaden Springer, young player, KJ Martin, and a first-round pick in 2026. They have
I
two.
like
That's the one from it's the least favorable out of the OKC, 2 first-rounders, so we don't really know yet, but you move 1 first-round pick. I think Brogdon is worth it. I think you bring in Brogdon, who can be a ball handler both in the starting lineup, on the bench. He can score. He's a bucket getter. We know the injury history, but he can facilitate. He can run a unit. And I don't think he's that bad of a defender. He's not great anymore, but he's still very good. And despite what he said about being happy in Portland, I think this is one of the guys who will be on the move. And you don't want him to go to a contender. We saw what he did in the playoffs last year against the Sixers. We've seen him multiple times before in big games. He doesn't miss. We saw him, like a week ago. The guy doesn't miss against the Sixers. So I would get Malcolm Brogdon in here, and he's got another year on his deal after this year, and I think he could be a part of the future.
Yeah, I like that. And he is a guy that won 6th Man of the Year last year. That as recently as last year, he was an impact player. He lit the Sixers up in that Celtics series, and he also seems to have a little bit of hatred for Boston on how things ended up there. He fits that same category, a little bit similar to DeJounte Murray to me, if he's a guy that frees Maxey up to play off ball, that he can take the reins as a point guard and can still get a bucket on his own, that he's a way better shooter than he gets credit for. And just look at like his stats on the year. 15.7 points per game, 5.5 assists, shooting 41.2% from 3 on 5.1 attempts per game. And this is not an outlier. That in his career, he's a 39.1% three-point shooter, shot 44.4% from 3 last year, which is pretty nutty there. And just 3 years ago, he scored 21.2 points per game. So he is a guy that is that dude. It's never been a question of ability. It's always been availability with him, that he does have some injury concerns. But that's why you have to take a gamble with it, that under the best of circumstances, this works out. I would like to see him join a contender, and I would love for it to be the Sixers. That makes sense to me. And just a first-round pick, Jaden Springer, KJ Martin, and Marcus Morris, for me, that's a more than just swallowable deal for me. So I like that quite a bit.
What do you think the Sixers will give up? What's the limit they're willing to go to? Because, again, they're trying to prioritize future flexibility. We know, they want to have the first-round picks available. They want to have all the cap space available. What point do they hit a threshold at this deadline where they say, yeah, we're not going above that point? We're not giving that up. Is it 2 first-round picks? Is it 1 first-round pick? Is it a first and a second? What extent do you think they're willing to go to? Maybe they have to wait until we hear a little bit more on Embiid, but maybe they already know behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But where do you think their mind is at? Like, we have to get a player. We don't have to get a player. What would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I think they should be feeling that they have to make a deal. They should be willing to dig into that pocket full of draft picks. That was the point of the James Harden trade. That to me, it made sense at the time and still does, to do that deal, to evaluate this team for a period of time, and then convert those draft picks into an actual player that can help this team. That all makes sense from a logic standpoint, but now you have to do it. Now you have to actually flip those picks for a player in a way that helps the Sixers team. So now is the time for that. And this also circles back to, I have like a philosophical disagreement on this cap space plan that Morey keeps going down. That I just don't think it makes sense from a logic standpoint. We just don't see big time guys change teams in free agency anymore. Jalen Brunson, probably the best player in recent memory that has done that. And it took some serious real deal tampering to make that even possible over there. So I just don't see this. And with Philadelphia not having the cleanest record of bringing in these top tier free agents. So to me, it makes way more sense to empty the assets and trade for a guy that you know will be here and that you physically get him in the organization. And especially if you want to attach it to, once again, a guy like DeJounte Murray with years on his contract, that you know that that's then an asset that you can hold on to. And same with Brogdon, that Brogdon has another year on his contract. I think Morey's going to look at that negatively and say, I don't want a $22.5 million committed to this guy next year. To me, that's a positive, that you know he's going to be playing for the Sixers next year. So I kind of disagree with how that is, but I do think that they should be willing to dig into their assets, and that they are for draft picks to an extent. The player conversation is tough. I think truly the only untouchable should be Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. I think in Morey's head, Tobias Harris is on that list, unfortunately. And beyond that, I think everyone else is pretty for the taking.
It's a good point when you think about it, especially for a team that's like in real contention mode right now. You don't know how many opportunities you have left. Yeah,
Exactly.
Maybe the cap space plan is flawed. Like, all right, we want to go in with all this flexibility, but what if we don't get the right guys? Then how many opportunities do we really have left with Joel Embiid? So I think it's a good point. I want to play a game here, and we'll go over some questions in the chat, and then I'll ask you a couple final things. But I'm going to just name off a player, and I want you to tell me yes or no. Will they be on the roster after Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern?
I like
And
it.
chat,
I like
you
it.
guys can participate too. So the first player I'll say, which you kind of talked about, Marcus Morris Sr. Yes or no, he will be on the roster 3 p.m. on Thursday.
No, I don't think he will. I think Marcus Morris, the contract makes too much sense. He's the most likely to be traded in my mind.
Robert Covington.
No, I think he's likely repackaged too. And that one hurts my heart a little bit more.
Tobias Harris.
Yes. I don't think more. I think Maury's so attracted to seeing that $40 million come off and eat his crumble cookies and enjoy watching him post up and take these tough 2 fadeaways. So yeah, I think Tobias is here for the long haul.
Do you believe in Tobias in the playoffs? Do you think he can finally kick out of it and under Nick Nurse, who will probably be switching everything in a playoff series? Do you think he can finally do it? Or are we looking at more of the same?
The same Tobias Harris that scored 2 points in game 6. That Tobias Harris?
Tobias.
The same Tobias Harris that is shooting the fewest 3-point attempts since 2015, 2016 in his career. No, I don't have any confidence in Tobias Harris to be that guy. I'm looking forward to this contract to get off the books. Ideally, they add a guy to where Tobias becomes less important, whether that is a Bogdanovic, a Buddy Hield, whatever the case may be. But it does just absolutely suck that this is the guy hogging so much of the salary cap, and he just is who he is at this point.
All right, a couple more. KJ Martin.
No, I think he gets flipped for a second-round pick, and that adds to the collection.
Our guy, Furkan Korkmaz.
Yes. I think
Furkan's not getting traded again. Furkan's here to stay, man. Hey, he's actually been playing okay. He's been playing okay, man. He's got confidence like a lion.
I do respect that out of Furkan. It does not matter how many months he's been sitting on the bench. When the last time he played, he's coming in and he's shooting that thing and he's letting it fly. He's doing his thing. He's throwing behind the back passes. I do like the spark and the confidence that Furk plays with. And frankly, they have needed a little bit of his ball handling, passing ability, and shooting and during this shorthanded stretch.
That contract was signed 2 years ago. This year, the Sixers got Kelly Oubre on a minimum, Pat Bev on a minimum. I mean, it's crazy, man. And Furk's making $5 million to sit on the back of the bench. But anyway, last one here, Mo Bamba.
Yeah, I think he's here. I hope he's not playing. He's probably, even including Tobias, Mo Bamba might be the most frustrating player that we've listed here.
I disagree. But Daniel House.
Daniel House.
But Bamba's up there too, man.
Yeah, Daniel House right in the mix as well. But for Mo Bamba, it's like, dude, you're 8 feet tall. You have a 9-foot wingspan and you just can't grab a rebound. Yeah. And it's weird because there are these short doses of stretches where you absolutely see it, where it's like, that's a perfectly functional backup center where he can hit the pick and pop. He is a legitimately good shooter. He can shot block for moments at a time, but then it's just like, I don't know if he spaces out or what the deal is. So I don't think Bamba's going anywhere. I certainly don't want him in the playoff rotation or really to see him much for the second half of the season, but I do think he ultimately stays on this roster.
My issue with Bamba is he doesn't even jump. Like there are possessions where he'll just sit under the rim and not even go for the ball. And I'm like, dude, you're 7'2". You have a 500-foot wingspan and you don't even put your arms up. It just doesn't make any sense. So shout out to my guy Roddy, said no Daniel House Jr. slander will be tolerated. I mean, it's just Daniel House is the funniest player in the NBA. I've come to realize, like the other night we were on the stream laughing. Daniel House tried a step back 3. Mid step back, Nick Nurse called a timeout. He just looked, he's like, I've had enough. I mean, I make fun of it. I'm like, House really thinks he's Michael Jordan. Like when he's on that court, he plays like he's MJ. And it's like, dude, relax. Just chill for a little
chaos. Pure chaos out there. So I mean, I respect the confidence out of Daniel House. He does every once in a while bring like a pop and an energy that I think is nice on this team, but it absolutely is pure chaos and it doesn't always come out in the right way.
Final thing I want to go into, and again, shout out to everybody in the chat. If you guys are still in here, do us a favor, drop a like on this show and subscribe, and be sure to follow Sean everywhere because he's always doing a great job. NBA trade deadline in itself, right? Do you have any bold predictions? Are there any players you're looking at that you could say, okay, maybe nobody's expecting this, they're going to get moved? Or is there a star or a big player that you're looking at saying, yeah, I would expect him to be on the move? Is there a certain team that may make a surprising move? What is your like top 1 or 2 bold takes for the trade deadline? What's the thing you're looking into? Like, damn, this is going to really shake up Thursday afternoon.
It's a great question. Trying to come up with a good one. I do think the Pistons do something stupid that they make a trade too ambitious to float themselves into from the absolute worst team in the NBA to like the third worst team in the NBA.
Like a broken foot Levine, bring him in
Yeah.
for the next 5 years.
I think that's why Levine got the surgery, man, is he started seeing the whispers of Detroit being interested, and he said, no, I'm all right. I'll see myself out. Surgery looks pretty good to me. So a little disappointing how that all played out. Levine, obviously, we've had plenty of conversations about. So I'll take Detroit doing something stupid as my takeaway there. What about, all right, this is my bold prediction there. The Detroit Pistons trade for Klay Thompson to try to climb out of things, and that's how things age. That's my bold prediction there.
Man, I don't know if I'd be more disappointed with Detroit or Golden State at that point, because Golden State's in a weird situation. I just don't see them breaking up their core. I don't think they're going to do anything, try to scratch into the playoffs. But if they were to trade Klay, and especially to Detroit, I mean, that'd be insane.
He's not even in their closing lineups anymore, Klay. Like, he looks like a broken man. I watched the interview with him post game last night, and I just genuinely felt bad for the dude. That, like, you could tell. And first off, hat tip that he handled it like an absolute pro. Like, the way that he took every conversation of, I'm just happy for the young guys. These guys are playing, winning trumps all those kind of quotes that he was given. But just looking in his eyes, it's like, that dude is broken, man. Like, I feel bad for him on a human being level.
No, absolutely. And on this trade piece from Jake Fisher, he actually mentioned Wiggins as the most likely guy to get moved. He's talking about Milwaukee and some of these other teams. I do think Wiggins could be moved. I'm actually going to go bold take on top of your bold take. I think Klay stays with Golden State and the Sixers sign him in free agency. I think the Sixers, maybe overpay a little bit, try to create a little bit of that dribble handoff magic with Klay and Joel. What would you think about that this next off season?
I mean, I do think he's a little cooked. I'll phrase it this way: I think there is a world where Klay Thompson can accept the reduced role and be very effective. That when he starts to be just more of these, like, for quite some time during this Golden State dynasty, he was the number 2. Like, it was Steph Curry and Klay Thompson was that team. He's far from that player anymore, but he's still a guy. Even when he's being talked about as how bad he's playing, he's still shooting over 37% from 3 on like 8 attempts per game, which is still pretty good efficiency. And that's a bad year for him. I believe it's the worst shooting year of his career. And that's pretty good if that's the worst shooting year of his career. So I do see a world where Klay could be helpful, but I don't see him being like a number 2 or even a number 3 on really a contender anymore. So I feel bad for the guy. He's definitely not the defender he once was, because there was a point in time where he was an absolute 2-way stud too. He's not that by any means. So I've definitely pumped my brakes on the excitement for Klay Thompson or circling him as a trade target, but I do see a world where it could happen, especially with Morey's got to spend the money on somebody if he's doing the brilliant cap space plan. So Klay is pretty close to the top of the list, unfortunately.
And it just seems like a Daryl Morey move. Like, I could just see it happening. I want to end off with this because somebody alerted me to this earlier. I forgot, but now I just pulled it up here. Look, all I'm saying is Bojan Bogdanovic listed questionable for tomorrow's game. What does it mean? Look, the comments are already saying, welcome to Philadelphia. Could this mean something? Doesn't mean nothing. Has Bogdanovic been out with injury? I don't even know, because who follows the damn Pistons? But Bogdanovic, questionable for Wednesday. You know what that speaks to me? We don't want you getting injured, buddy. And we turned down 2 first-round picks for you, which is nuts. And now your value's not that high. So if we get an offer we like, guess what? We're pulling the trigger, baby. Bogdanovic to Philly. What do we think?
Yeah, I'm all in. Let's make it happen. That I guess, like, I need 2 players that the Sixers. I need 2 impact player on this team when we circle back to this conversation on Friday. Though, as we're looking at that game, I want to be talking about 2 impact players. He absolutely makes that qualification in my mind. I'll take any bit of tea leaf reading that we can get. So I love him being ruled out. I'm totally cool with it. I've talked myself into it for sure. I hope Daryl Morey is ready to get busy, man.
I think they're either going Bogdanovic or one of the Bogdanoviches, either Bogdan or Bojan and Drummond, or they're going Drummond and Brogdon. Those would be my 2 alleyways to go down. Other than that, I don't think you're getting much better. I mean, there's pieces you can plug in, but if they only make like one move, like KJ Martin to the Phoenix Suns for a 2nd-round pick, we kind of get the gist of what's going on. A lot of people in the chat say yay on Bojan. Buddy Hield's been kind of an up and down one. They're not too sure, given how his numbers have fallen off a little bit. But at the end of the day, Sixers have needs. We have uncertainty on Joel Embiid, but we finally have interest in players. So I'm excited to see what they do. And like I said, guys, we'll be live on Thursday at 1 p.m. Tap in, and we'll react to all the chaos. Sean, thank you for tapping in with us as always. And please follow him on every platform that he's on. Go ahead and let them know where to follow you because he always does a great job.
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter at Sean_Barnard1. Check me out on YouTube on Sixers Digest as well as Pick Swap Media. We will have a new Pick Swap podcast dropping out immediately after this, so be ready for that once we wrap this one up there. As well as check out Pick Swap Media and Fox Sports The Gambler across all socials. You can catch me on the Fox Sports The Gambler airwaves Saturdays from 11 to 1 and throughout the week with Sean Brace on a Picks and Roll, which is a Sixers-specific and NBA podcast there. So a little bit of everywhere. Twitter is probably the most centralized way to follow along, which is at Sean_Barnard1 again. But appreciate you for having me on, RB, and always good chopping up with a Sixers team that has hopefully given us a little bit of hope here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Game tomorrow night. Sixers and Warriors, and the trade deadline on Thursday. Break down all the news. Y'all know what to do. Smash the like, hit that subscribe button. We will catch you all on the next one. Have a great night, everybody. Peace.